I love when people ask questions or just ask me to discuss certain topics on the podcast. I was asked a while back to review the Second Amendment, so here we go, next on the Constitution Study.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long through line of everyday Americans.
Well, hello there, everyday Americans. Paul Engel here with the Constitution Study, where we read and study the Constitution and teach the rising generation to be free. I'm glad you could join me today. I hope you had a wonderful Independence Day. As always, head over to this website, constitutionstudy.com. That's where you can find everything I'm working on. Keep up with the book, see where I'm speaking, ask a question like this person that we're going to review today did. I love the interaction. I love questions. It's kind of what keeps me going in all this. As always, I want to give a shout out to those who've been helping me not only develop this content, but distribute this content, whether it's Dustin or Jesse or Kim that are taking this and sending it out. Organizations like Constitutional Grassroots Movement, Restore the Intent, Conversations on the Culture, these all are working to help get this message out because they think it's as important as I do and hopefully as important as you do. Also, I want to let you know that at the end of July, I will be in Atlanta. I think it's the 26th and the 27th. I'll be at the Southeast Homeschool Expo. It's in Atlanta, Georgia. If you're in the area, please stop by. If you're at the conference, shake my hand. I'd love to meet you, love to talk with you, love to see what's on your mind. I'm still looking for a volunteer to help me in the booth that Friday. So if you've got some time that Friday and you want to go to the expo, I'll pay to get you in and I'll even buy you lunch. Just let me know. Contact me through that website, constitutionstudy.com. So let's talk about the Second Amendment. I think part of the misunderstanding of this amendment appears to deal with basic English. It's the basic construction of the sentence that people get all twisted and try to say something it doesn't. But it's really pretty simple. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, I'm no English major, but I did grow up around writers and editors. I married a writer and editor. We helped raise a daughter who was a writer and editor. So I know when I look at a sentence, one of the things I like to do is deconstruct it. So let's take a look at this amendment. Let's break down this sentence. And we find that there are two phrases in this. There's what's called an establishing statement and a command. Now let's start off with the militia, right? A well-regulated militia. Now, how often have you heard someone say the Second Amendment is about the militia? Well, the term militia is definitely in the amendment, but it's part of an establishing statement. It's not the instruction of the amendment. So what is this establishing statement I'm talking about? Simply, it's a statement that establishes the context for whatever comes next. For example, Susie is a great student. She is applying to Harvard next year. Or Johnny is a good boy. He would never do something like that. Murder is wrong. It should receive the harshest punishment possible. You see, all of these sentences start with an establishing statement, explaining why the rest of the sentence makes sense. The establishing statement in the Second Amendment explains why we need the command that will follow. You see, this well-regulated militia is an entity being described. It is not the subject of the amendment. You see, it says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The militia is necessary. It's necessary for our states to remain free. Nothing more, nothing less. So what is this entity that a free state's security so depends on? Well, going to Webster's dictionary, it defines a militia in two ways. The body of soldiers in a state enrolled for discipline but not engaged in actual service except in emergencies, as distinguished from regular troops, whose sole occupation is war or military service. The militia of a country are the able-bodied men organized into companies, regiments, and brigades with officers of all grades, and required by law to attend military exercises on certain days only, but at other times left to pursue their usual occupations. You see, at its core, a state militia is a group of citizens who are able to serve, but they only do so during emergencies. They differ from a national militia or militia of a country in that persons enrolled in the state militias are only served during the emergencies. See, a state militiaman has no duty to serve except when needed, while the national militia are not only all able-bodied men, but they are required by law to attend exercises. And if we think about this, this will make a lot of sense. See, if we look at these two different types of militia, the state and national, the federal law refers to them as the organized and unorganized militia. The militia of the United States shall consist of all able-bodied males at least 17 years of age, and except as provided in sections 313 of Title 32, under 45 years of age who are or have made a declaration of intention to become citizens of the United States, and of female citizens of the United States who are members of the National Guard. The classes of the militia are the organized militia, which consists of the National Guard and the Naval Militia. The unorganized militia, which consists of the members of the militia who are not members of the National Guard or the Naval Militia. You see, the militia needs to be well regulated, but what did that mean to the people who signed and ratified the amendment? I found this excellent article by Brian T. Hallinan at the Constitution Society. See, Mr. Hallinan describes the use of the term well-regulated as follows. The phrase well-regulated was in common use long before 1789 and remained so for a century thereafter. It referred to property of something being in proper working order. Something that was well-regulated was calibrated correctly, functioning as expected. Establishing government oversight of the people's arms was not only not the intent of the use of the phrase in the Second Amendment, it was precisely to render the government powerless to do so that the founders wrote it. See, in short, the term well-regulated referred to something being in proper working order, not something overseen or regulated by a government. Now, whether it's the organized militia, the National Guard and Naval Militia, or the unorganized militia, which is pretty much all other able-bodied persons, those who are not enrolled in the militia, they are necessary to a free state. But have you ever asked yourself why? Well, the answer is really quite simple. Who else is going to keep the peace? Let's talk about that free state, though, first. See, when we declared independence from Great Britain, we created 13 free and independent states. So what is a free state? Well, according to the dictionary, free in government, not enslaved, not in a state of vassalage or dependence, subject only to fixed laws made by consent and to a regular administration of such laws, not subject to the arbitrary will of a sovereign or lord, as a free state, nation, or people. You see, if our states are not vassals of the federal government, and they shouldn't be, if we are not dependent on others except by laws made by our consent, if we are not subject to arbitrary rules made by some other governing body, then we are free. Now, if we do live in free states, who will maintain our security? Sure, we could put troops on every corner to protect us, but then we'd be living in a police state, not a free one. We could create laws barring us from the tools to maintain our security, but that would make us subject to arbitrary laws, since I've never seen a gun control law that does not exempt law enforcement. And it would also make us dependent on a government for our protection. In other words, it makes us vassals, which also means we would not be free. So if we are to remain free and secure, we need an armed citizenry, an armed populace, so we can protect ourselves. Now, I'm sure you've heard it said that we have police today, so we don't need people running around with guns to protect themselves. Well, in my experience, this is usually said by someone who has not had to wait anxiously for the police to respond to a 911 call, hoping against hope that the armed law enforcement will get there before the criminal finds them. But here's another question. Who protects the neighborhood when the police can't or won't? Now, make no mistake, I hold most law enforcement officers in the highest regard. They risk their lives every day trying to protect us from the worst elements of society. However, they cannot be everywhere all the time, and we really don't want to live in that sort of police state. When the riots broke out in Ferguson, Missouri, or Baltimore, Maryland, who protected the neighborhood while the police fought the rioters? It was the armed citizen. But riots are rare, and that's true, but what about the rest of the time? Well, a little bit of research found that the U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics in their National Crime Victimization Survey frequently estimate defensive gun uses at a little over 100,000 times per year. And that is the low end of the range for studies of defensive gun use. Also, it does not take into account other arms like knives, pepper spray, and stun guns. So if at least 100,000 times people protect themselves using firearms each and every year, does that not show how the right to keep and bear arms is necessary to the security of a free state? Another situation where the militia is necessary to the security of a free state is when the government is corrupt. There's an article on the website, and I'll put a link in the description, that I titled The Battle of Athens, Tennessee. In that article, I tell the story of a 1946 election in eastern Tennessee and how a group of World War II veterans used their right to keep and bear arms to expose and stop election fraud and racketeering in their county. See, appeals to both state and federal authorities to help them went unanswered, leaving the citizens as their only and last line of defense. While the Battle of Athens was an extreme example, watching mayors and governors ordering police not to engage with violent criminals makes me wonder how long before the people will need to take up arms for their own defense. Lastly, if a state is to be free, it cannot be a vassal to another government. While states today have submitted themselves to the control of the federal government, in direct violation of the Constitution, by the way, if they are not to be vassals, they must be able to defend themselves, including, yes, from that federal government. See, if Congress can call up a state's organized militia, which they can under the Constitution, how is a state to defend itself? Well, the answer is the unorganized militia. Let's look at the next section. Let's look at the command. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. See, it seems pretty simple to me, but apparently a lot of people are confused by this part of the amendment. Now, back to those who claim the Second Amendment applies only to the militia. Now, even though the unorganized militia consists of all able-bodied people, the Second Amendment states quite clearly it is the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Nowhere else in the Constitution does the term the people refer to anything but the individual citizen. Want some examples? Well, let's take a look. The House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year by the people of the several states, Article 1, Section 2. Or the right of the people to peaceably assemble, the First Amendment. How about the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated? Well, that's the Fourth Amendment. How about the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people? The Ninth Amendment. Last but not least, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by it to the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. That's the 10th Amendment. If these other references to the people mean individuals, why would it mean something different in this one amendment? Well, the short answer, I believe, is because people are looking for a justification for their position rather than looking at what the Constitution actually says. Otherwise, only certain people would have the right to assemble. Only special people would have the right against unreasonable search and seizure. And the rights would only be reserved to the elites. Now, if it's the people who have this right, what about the keep and bear arms? So I remember talking with one person a few years ago who stated quite bluntly that we don't have the right to carry a firearm. I asked him quite simply, and a little tongue-in-cheek, what do you think the word bear means? An animal in the woods? So you have the right to own and carry arms for the simple reason is it's necessary to maintain a free state. Notice, the amendment does not say firearms, but arms. That includes knives, swords, and chemical sprays. In fact, it includes anything that can be considered a weapon. Look at the dictionary. Arms, weapons of offense or armor for defense and protection of the body. You see, we talk about gun control laws, but what about knife control laws? Or laws against carrying pepper spray or stun guns? Did you know that in the state of New York, it is illegal to carry a knife that can be opened one-handed? And don't forget it says, shall not be infringed. Now this shall not is a simple, obligatory statement. Yet people and governments repeatedly find ways to infringe on our rights and get the courts to agree with them. You know, George Orwell said, there are some ideas so absurd that only an intellectual could believe them. I agree with him. See, it doesn't say may not or shall not be infringed or should not be infringed. It says shall not be infringed. That means any infringement on our right to keep and bear arms is a violation of the right protected by the Second Amendment, and therefore it's illegal. So what does it mean to infringe? To break as contracts, to violate either positively by contravention or negatively by non-fulfillment or neglect of performance. To break, to violate, to transgress, to neglect to fulfill or obey as to infringe a law. To destroy or hinder as to infringe efficacy. To break, violate, destroy, hinder, deny. All these things describe modern gun ownership. What does it say about states that make it almost impossible for someone to own or carry a gun, a firearm, a knife, or pepper spray? What about limiting the guns they can own or how much ammunition they can carry? Are they not infringing on these rights? Courts have issued opinions that as long as there is some way to carry a firearm, your rights haven't been infringed. But that just doesn't make sense. That doesn't match the plain English language used in the Constitution. Now, I've heard a lot of really hyperbolic arguments against a simple, plain reading of the Second Amendment. By far the most ridiculous was a question posed during my very first Constitution study. What about nuclear arms? Do you think someone should be allowed to own a nuclear weapon? Now, my guess is that the person believed that there were some arms just so powerful, so destructive, that they should not be trusted to the hands of the general public. Of course, they don't seem to mind having them trusted to the hands of individuals in government. But we're at the Constitution study. What does the Constitution say? Well, to understand this, we need to start with a short discussion about rights. So you remember, we define a right as something a person possesses and can only be legitimately used when it does not infringe on the rights of others. While I understood the person's point, because personally I cannot think of a legitimate reason why someone would want to own a nuclear weapon. But does my reasoning determine someone else's right? You see, since the Constitution not only recognizes our right to keep and bear arms, but protects it by specifying that it shall not be infringed, it's not up to me to determine what arms you may or may not possess. If someone wants to own a nuclear bomb, well, as long as they don't infringe on someone else's right, the Constitution says, go ahead. Now, the other argument, when all else fails, is to come up with some ridiculous situation and use those extremely unlikely situations to justify the infringement of others' rights. I've heard people say, well, if a citizen uses a firearm to defend themselves, they may injure or kill an innocent bystander. Think about that for a second. See, completely lost in that argument is the fact that for someone to legally defend themselves with lethal force, there must be an imminent threat of death or serious injury to an innocent party. In other words, their life is already in danger. So I remember shortly after the Sandy Hook mass murder, a school in Staten Island wanted to place armed, retired NYPD officers in the school for security. Retired policemen. Parents went to the media terrified that a retired police officer in the stressful situation of a mass shooting might shoot an innocent child. Think about that for a moment. Your child is in school. and their life is being threatened by a criminal, possibly deranged person. But these parents don't want an arm. They were more worried that a retired police officer might injure their child rather than protect their child. They'd rather wait for an active duty police officer to show up. Now, I don't mean to demean the pain of anyone who has lost a loved one to any form of illegal violence. But would the parents in this situation feel better if their child was killed by the criminal while they were waiting for the armed police officer? No. It's a straw man, and it's a ridiculous one at that. One in a long line of ridiculous straw men, trying to justify their own fears and ignorance about firearms and personal safety. Now, while hyperbole and straw men may be the most ridiculous objections to our rights, they are not the most prevalent. I often hear it said that people don't need, take your pick. Maybe they don't need assault weapons, which really is a made-up term used to scare people. They don't need 30-round magazines. They don't need hollow point bullets. They don't even need semi-automatic rifles. I've even heard gun people say people don't need one of the above. But I thought we lived in America, which I thought was a free country. So as long as I don't infringe on another's legitimate right, I should be able to own and carry any weapon I want. If I want to walk through downtown with a fully automatic pistol, a suppressed AR-15, a Celtic broadsword, a mace, and a giant canister of pepper spray while dragging a cannon and a catapult behind me, nothing should stop me until I threaten someone else. And no, carrying a weapon in public is not threatening someone, nor does it infringe on anyone's legitimate rights, since the right to not see weapons must by definition infringe on someone else's recognized right to bear arms. The problem is, it seems to be human nature to define right and acceptable by our own standards, along with a desire to force others to live the way we think they should. But that is not the way rights work. I have no right to tell someone else how to live or what they can do unless what they are doing violates a legitimate right of my own or someone else's. The ability to tell someone else how to live and to impose my view on others who have done me no harm is not liberty, and it's not freedom. It's tyranny. See, I think we've been so poisoned by this gun control propaganda that we've lost sight of what our rights are and how they can be exercised. The idea that someone might want to carry a tool to protect their own safety has become uncivilized. But that is a relatively new development in this nation. There's a reason why, until recently, in fact, within my lifetime, you used to be able to buy guns in the hardware store, order them through the mail, or carry your hunting rifle to school. Any weapon is a tool. It does not possess intent on its own. It is not until a human being uses that tool that they bring intent to the situation, and it's intent and actions that infringe on rights, not tools or inanimate objects. And while we're at it, what is it with the idea that the proper way to deal with criminal behavior is to punish the innocent? If the purpose of government is to secure our rights, how can it be a legitimate function for said government to restrict the rights of those who have violated no law in the name of reducing crime? Again, that is not liberty. It is tyranny. I am repeatedly told I must sacrifice my rights because someone might do something bad. I'm told I can't have certain guns or certain accessories because someone might use them to do harm. Oddly enough, rarely would those restrictions actually hinder someone with criminal intent, but let's forget logic. I cannot take my personal protection tool to certain locations because, well, someone might commit a crime there. I have never threatened or hurt someone with a weapon in my life. Yet there are those both inside the various governments and this nation as a whole who feel they have the right not only to infringe on my liberty, but to infringe on my rights because they are afraid that I or someone else like me might do something bad. By that logic, we should ban the printing press. We should ban free speech, the media, and in fact all public assemblies because someone might say or do something bad. So the next time you hear someone claim we must do something that infringes on someone's rights in the name of security, remind them that the infringement of one right leads to the infringement of all rights, including their own right to make such foolish and tyrannical statements. See, if we give the government the power to infringe on someone else's rights, they have the power to infringe on your rights as well. Now, today's discussion surrounded the Second Amendment, and we focused on the use and control of firearms, or more accurately, controlling people with firearms. But this amendment is about enshrining Americans' right to protect their own freedom. Whether it's protecting yourself and your family or protecting your state, our individual right to keep and bear arms of all kinds is fairly unique in the world. Rather than looking for how or under what circumstances we can infringe on these rights, maybe we should return to the original intent of our founding fathers and focus on keeping ourselves free. Only then, when we are free to provide for our own safety, will we be truly free. Instead, we're told to depend on government to provide for our safety, making us vassals, serfs, servants of this entity that we created. Maybe that's why so many work so hard to find ways to infringe on this right. They're afraid what would happen if the American people were truly free. So I hope you enjoyed this discussion. I'm sorry it took so long to get to it. I hope it was worth the wait. Please, in the comments below, let me know what you think. Did I miss something? Did I not explain something right? Maybe give us examples of how your state is infringing on your rights, or even better, what are you doing to restore rights to the citizens of your state? Whatever you do, please, again, we're not looking to create criminals, but we are looking for people to understand their rights and be prepared to defend and assert them. And I'd love for you to share with others how you're defending and asserting your right to keep and bear arms. So join us next time on the Constitution Study. I hope to see you there. Have a great day.
There's one thing you have to know wherever you make your stand. Came from a long